Okay, I'm gonna wait till everybody's back in here. All right. I think we all should be coming back right about now. All right. So how was that? Any quick comments on how it went? We'll definitely reflect, but was it good? Do you think it was helpful?
Definitely, especially since we're not together. It gave us at least a moment to get to kind of connect with, even if it's with few people.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I'm glad. All right, so we are going to do, Dewey says fresh perspectives, yep. We're gonna do a little group share out, and so you don't necessarily have to share your entire risk bow tie, but maybe kind of walk me through those 5 steps and give me, one of each, what your, hold on just a second. Yeah, what your underlying conditions were, or just like one of those, what one of your consequences were, one of your preventive controls and reactive controls, sort of walk me through that a little bit. If one person from a group would like to share, we can start doing that. If somebody wants to unmute their something. Tell us what scenario you picked and what you came up with.
I can share our group if our group agrees.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, Carol. Yeah, but thank you.
Well, we had a privilege of doing a real life scenario of low participation, declining high school participation. And that was step 1. Step 2 might have been the causing, step 2 is underlying condition, could have been COVID. And it could be defeated, overwhelmed parents, which also could be because of COVID. Step 3, we had some positives and negatives. I mean, well, one of the good things is that with Zoom, some mentors were not coming and some mentees were not coming, but with Zoom, there was always some mentor for some mentees, some mentors for some mentees. And this was actually very healthy. And we've thought that perhaps going forward, it would be a really good thing, even after COVID, to have some kind of venue where you have that safety net and, new connections and networking. And the bad thing, of course, is that the children were not being reached because of low participation on both parts of it, mentors and mentees. Step 4 was a preventive control and also possibly a reactive control, and that is to do a survey of the high school students, asking them what they want and what they don't want. For example, is it the schedule or what, give feedback from them so that their needs can be met. And that led into an idea that some mentors, especially older ones, were teaching, tutors were teaching old math and not supporting the elementary school teachers. So it wasn't being very helpful to the child because they weren't piggybacking with the teacher, and that might have been training. That might have been required. Step 5 is also, ask why the kids needs are not being met, but also possibly compare. And even though I'm in New Mexico, I'm moving to Easton, and my town, Albuquerque, is huge, and we don't have a lot of mentors. Easton is tiny, and it has 100 mentors. So perhaps wonder if it's not demographics, perhaps figure out why they're so successful and apply their methods as needed to the problem with the declining participation.
Thank you, Carol. That was a great example. I'm glad that it was like a real life one, especially with COVID. And the silver lining, which I think a lot of us are starting to realize, is there are a lot of benefits to Zoom, and sometimes it does help with reach and convenience. So I think those were some great examples. Thank you. All right. So there were 4 groups. So is there any other groups that can share out with us? Kind of following the Carol's process.
I can go. In my
Okay,
group was
great.
Debbie and Sakia and Callie and Amanda. And we went deep with our scenario. We had the idea that the risk event was an inappropriate interaction, and that the mentee and the mentor's expectation was it was a virtual connection, but they ended up meeting outside of in a public place, and then the mentor had her children, like her biological children, with her, and she ended up bringing the mentee back to her home, and a mask was not used. So I told you, we went deep. So underlying conditions, just to kind of highlight a few, not sure of the child's trauma history, violating trust with the mentee's guardian, unknowing, staying outside of what was expected. How did the mentor's kids interpret the match relationship? In terms of preventative controls, were there written expectations, and was it further solidified in the training? Were they clear and understood by the mentors, even maybe possibly requiring a signature? Was there enough match support to discover the wrongdoing either right before, right after? And maybe even the possibility of the mentor's significant other being part of the screening process, and that person possibly, assuming they are, part of this world, is that they might have identified that as something outside of what was expected of their spouse or partner. Then reactive controls, having corrective conversations with match support and the mentor, further training to resend the documents, but then a general core principle to have continuing education for all mentors, and ensuring that the trainings that are being offered evolve with best practices, and conferring with Mentor National or Mentor Maryland or other affiliates in terms of professional peers, having a conversation with the guardian and possibly the mentee in terms of their feelings around it. We ran out of time a little bit in terms of consequences, but the upside is that we thought the mentee could feel part of the mentor's personal life and build that relationship, and the mentor could be able to share their world with the mentee. Downside is that the family withdraws from the program, or the child is triggered in some way.
No, that was very in depth. I really appreciate that example. And I like that you brought in like those best practices for match support and monitoring. In the EEP, they actually do talk about, when you're kind of doing that screening, having screenings done at homes, just to make sure, if you are to see your mentee outside of like an operation location or something, that it's a safe environment, and that, like you said, hopefully it wouldn't re-traumatize or traumatize a child, and you would lose that relationship. So yeah, I think that was great. Appreciate that. Is there one more group that wants to share out before we move forward? Okay, we can move to the next slide. These are some more follow-up questions that you can, share out or answer in the chat, or just write down to think about later. But Antoine, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So these are some good reflection questions after really any activity. What did you find helpful about this activity? Definitely put that in the chat, because I'd love to see, what the most helpful thing of this activity was for you. Also, when would you use the bow tie? When would you sit down with your team and use this activity to plan out how you would approach these risk events? Also, what's the silver lining? We kind of reviewed that. You guys made some great silver linings to think about. And then also, how would you change the bow tie? How would you adapt it to better work for your organization and what you guys do in your mission? I'll give you guys like another, 2 minutes if anybody wants to share out. I like to hear voices or in the chat. Any more comments? I think this is a really cool exercise, because risk management to me, I'm only 23 years old, so to me it sounds very boring. but it actually was very fun to go through this training myself and then create it, because I thought the bow tie was really helped me understand and break it down. Especially talking about, how you can prevent it and how you react to it, I think are my most useful parts of this activity. Jonathan said he was able to understand and grasp the concept better. Yeah, exactly. And that's the goal. I hope that this was helpful. All right, well, we can move on to the other. Oh, Stephanie says, would love to go deeper. Can you share the training you attended? I'm not sure the training that we attended has a recording, but I will definitely reach out to, it was through Mentor National, so I'll reach out to them and provide that if I can, if I'm allowed. Martina says this was great and would be helpful to share with mentors on how we can design programming. Yeah, definitely. Because they are those frontline workers that I was kind of talking about earlier. It's important to have all perspectives at the table. Keela says it helped me understand and break it down in a way that sounds less scary. She said, I'm younger too, and it feels kind of like a big thing, because it is. Yeah, it does. Feels like a big thing, but still helpful, so thank you. All right, Antoine, you can go to the next slide. So, Sarah said, I hear risk and I assume a violation in child safety, but it is so much more than that. Yep. There are good risks that you can take to kind of farther your work and reach more children and be more effective. There are good risks. All right, so back to those components of risk management. I laid out 3 earlier, and we've gone through risk assessment and we've done our activity with it. And then that second component is contingency planning and what we like to call business continuity planning. And so there's sort of like this trap that we find ourselves in where we perceive the past as being linear. And so we also perceive the future as being linear. And so again, with that, perception does not equal reality. Is the problem with this thinking is that we really miss the winding road or the mountains and valleys, the ups and downs that not only every organization goes through, but also every person in that organization. And so looking at it in a linear way is not very helpful, and it's not accurate. And so in reality, the past is a winding road, as you can kind of see in this, what I tried to create of reality. You see it's a winding road, and then there at the point at the end is kind of where you are now. And the other arrows are future possibilities, future aspects that could happen. And so that's how we approach contingency planning, is thinking of all those alternate futures. And so I put this little funny thing on here. You might not think it's funny, but I actually can't read the tiny print from where I'm at. But if you read it, it kind of talks about, just because she was treating me like this then she'll treat me like this in the future type of example. But you can go to the next slide. Okay, wait, but okay. Yeah, so with business continuity planning, there are really 2 main things that we're trying to keep in mind here. And that first one is that it's important that we identify those mission critical functions and activities that must be sustained in light of a crisis. And so this is something that has to happen, in order for an organization to continue to exist, or else, they might not be able to exist. For COVID, I'm sure a lot of organizations kind of went through this. It was almost impossible really to maintain a lot of the work we did, because it was very hands-on and in person and activity oriented. Sorry, I was letting somebody into here. Somebody was in the waiting room. But yeah, so that's one goal. And then as you identify those mission critical activities that must be sustained, you also want to start thinking about if those activities were scaled back, how are we going to resume those functions in an efficient and effective way? And so with COVID, we're still kind of in the midst of it. We're definitely not in person yet, or really very near to being in person, but we're getting there. We're on the up. Hopefully, but this is a time when we start thinking about how we are going to resume post-COVID, how we're going to resume our activities, and where they were talking about the silver lining in their risk bow tie, they said, there is a positive to having these Zoom meetings. It's more convenient. It makes it more accessible for some people. It encourages people to attend these meetings and actually, connect with one another. And so, they talked about, even after we roll back into it, we might make a space where this is still a possibility and a place for mentees and mentors to meet and carry on that relationship. And so that's something to think about as you begin to resume these activities after a risk event, not just for COVID, but really for maybe a natural disaster or maybe loss of staff in your program at an exponential rate. Give me like one more in here. Yes, but you can move to the next slide. And so business continuity planning also helps, to determine, which functions, like we said, must be sustained and also which functions can be interrupted and for how long. And so you think about the ones that we absolutely cannot remain this function right now because of, restrictions or policies or, low capacity or any low funding, not having grants or funding coming in at a regular flow. These are certain functions that, we have to interrupt at this time, but for how long can we have this interrupted? And then also how to maintain pertinent functions in the wake of a risk event. And so there's actually a tool here that I'm gonna, if you don't mind, Antoine, if you can unshare your screen and I'm gonna share mine real quick. Awesome, thank you. Oh, wait. All right. So I think you guys are able to see this, but so this is also another worksheet that the NRMC provides that I will attach in the email after this. But this is a business impact worksheet. And so this is helping you to identify the impact of downtime for those various activities and processes. And so again, you would come down here to this chart and you would put in those key function or activities. For example, payroll is a very important activity in order to keep an organization running. You have to be able to pay your employees to do the work that they provide. And so the MAD stands for maximum acceptable downtime. And up here you see a word that goes along with how many hours that can be down. And so for payroll, it's critical. And so 24 hours is the maximum acceptable downtime of this. And then in this third column, you talk about recovery timeframe and strategies. And so payroll processing can be transferred, to a different contractor or ADP with a 24 hours notice, so that this payroll can go through and support your team. And there's also a few more examples, and then they give you the opportunity, fill that in yourself for your organization. Yeah, and then we'll get into this a little later if we have time, but I think we're reaching the end here. So I'll unshare my screen and then I'll let Antoine bring back his.
So before I administered the polygraph exam, I had a.
All right, I think we're good. All right, so we can go on to the next slide there and we'll start finishing up here. I was gonna ask this question, but I know we're a little short on time, but please feel free to also, put this in the chat if you do have something that comes to mind. But what are some additional strategies for proactive planning? A good example is those preventative controls that you were kind of hashing out and brainstorming on. Those are, other ways of proactive planning. For example, somebody said, training, making sure that there's enough training for mentors, but also a good thing to keep in mind is cross training. So, we have a team of 6 and we all do have our own specific roles, but it's important that, we kind of collaborate and work together and share, the work that we're doing so that if one staff member has to leave, somebody can kind of come in and make up for that lost capacity in the meantime before. Yes. especially with like if you have a risk manager or one person who's kind of over all of that assessment and procedurals, it's important to, you know, cross-train all employees. Carol says, always listen to mentees, mentors for reactive and preventative controls. Exactly. Definitely have a feedback loop in some way or another. Have surveys, have roundtables, have panels, discussions. Another one is like succession planning. So say an executive director might, for some reason or another, have to relieve his position, or really any other employee, but having a plan for how you would move forward before that actually happens. And so it's not such a shock. And then, as we've said, document, you know, written plans and procedures. So we know exactly what we need to keep in mind and how we need to move forward. And also like stretchability, being able to stretch assignments and anticipate those multiple futures and possibilities with what we do. And so I'll touch on, we can go to the next slide and I'll finish this up with those 3 components. But the last component is risk communication. And as you see up here, the definition for that is risk communication is your approach to communicating information about and securing support for your organization's risk management strategies. So there's a few questions up there to keep in mind when you're thinking about how are we going to communicate this to our audiences. And especially with COVID, you know, think about how you guys communicated that to your stakeholders. When you did communicate, what were stakeholders wanting to know and what did they need to know? Keep that in mind for future risk events. We may not have another pandemic, but I'm sure, you know, there will be something maybe to that extreme, hopefully not, that could happen again, or even just any risk event. But, you know, what do they want to know? What do they need to know? Am I well qualified and suited with the right information to provide to those people? You know, if it's not me, then who? And if it is me, how can I be better equipped to provide that information in an appropriate manner? And then is that issue that we are monitoring and that we are speaking about with our audience, is this going to be something that we'll need to provide regular updates with? I was not here at the beginning of COVID, but I was actually working for another nonprofit. It was a domestic violence shelter. And so we also had residential clients as well as community clients as well who were past residents. And so it was really, really hard for us to sit down and think about how are we going to sustain not only our residents' safety and maintaining their safety, but how are we also, you know, going to be helpful for our clients that are outside of the shelter, because it's really important that we help them and support them as they're trying to get back on their feet, as they're trying to, you know, build a life for themselves outside of an abusive environment. And so that was really, really critical for us to sit down and figure out how we're going to communicate that to our board, as well as how we're going to communicate that to our clients that we work with on a pretty regular basis. And so we had to really sit down and make sure that all the critical points that everyone needed to know for safety, as well as for functions to resume, that had to be communicated in a well organized way. And so you can go to the next one. So these, they provided this in our training, but it's actually from a document from the EPA, and it's called the 7 Cardinal Rules of Risk Communication. And I won't go too heavily into this, and I've kind of touched a little bit on it, but it's important to involve everybody that needs to be in this conversation, and also planning carefully, evaluating your efforts, listening to specific concerns. We talked about perception isn't reality, but it's important that we listen to people's fears. Also just being honest, frank, open, empathetic towards everyone's worries and concerns. Also coordinating, collaborating. That's a lot of what we had to do during COVID, is a lot of collaboration with other organizations to really make sure that we're still making an impact and that we're still supporting our communities. And there might be a need of the media. If something maybe has blown up in your organization, there might have to be a certain process for how you're going to communicate that to the media, if that were the case. You can go on to the next one. So I think I'm gonna we only have about 6 more minutes. And so I'm gonna start wrapping it up actually, just so we can get surveys and any questions. But There are some certain challenges to risk management, one being superstition. People think, you know, if I talk about it, it's going to happen. And that's just not true. It's important that you talk about it and you plan about it, because you'll be worse off in the end. And then there's the fear of failure. We believe that failure is a bad thing, especially for our organizations that have such a, you know, an ambitious and positive mission. And we feel like it makes us look bad, but there's always a silver lining in failure. And so it's important to be able to be okay with the fact that failure might occur. And then, you know, there's the problem of a lack of an open communication feedback environment in the workplace. People don't feel safe to raise their hand and be like, this is my thoughts on this, and this is what I think we should probably focus on or move forward with. And because one answer from one person is not the best answer. You need everybody to be able to speak and give feedback, and that's the best way to get information and to move forward in these situations. Then you move on to the next one. Just real quick, these are some things to keep in mind when inspiring proactive risk management. Is of course adaptation, having shared responsibility within the organization, not just one risk manager, breaking it down, for example, with the risk bow tie, and acknowledging uncertainty. Acknowledging as a human, I cannot predict the future and I do not know how it will happen. All I know is from past experiences, what has been helpful, what has not been helpful, and that's how we will go forward, you know, acknowledging our mere human nature. But that's the end of the slide. Actually, you can go to the next one, and this is just a space for any questions that anyone might have. Feel free to ask. And if you want to go to the next one while we're answering questions, if anyone has any, you can also do our survey. This is super, super helpful for us. So definitely you can get your phone out and do it like that, or I will actually drop in the chat the bit.ly link. Thank you, Kim. Thank you for joining us. Is there any questions or comments? I appreciate all the thank yous. You're very welcome. I enjoyed today.
I have a comment.
Okay.
Someone in the chat was saying that when they saw risk in as the title, that they thought it might pertain to an at-risk child. And I thought it was kind of funny because that's what I thought. But this has been wonderful. But then I'm also thinking that we could use this because I know that, you know, a lot of at-risk children, but we could give the bow tie, work through the bow tie with bad decisions that children have made. And I just think it would be really good for them to use the logical steps themselves.
No, I think that translates honestly very well. I think it does because yeah, you would think about, you know, what led to this, how could you prevented this, what are the consequences of it? Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I appreciate you sharing that for anyone else who might want to use that idea. All right. I appreciate you guys for joining us. I know some people have already kind of hopped off, but feel free to stay. There are 2 more minutes and we can sit here and talk about anything, or if you're still trying to finish up that evaluation, take your time. And if you want to, oh yeah. And if anybody wants a certificate, we do give out certificates of participation. And we just ask that you email our info box, or whenever I send out a follow-up email, everybody, you can email me for a certificate.